All right. Good morning, everyone. How's it going? And so Gesha is away. We had a really nice volley that stayed with us for, I think, 2 or 3 months called Sandy, which is from Flinders Islands, somewhere between Tasmania and Melbourne. And so she invited Gesha to visit Flinders Island. So the lucky people get to go to Tasmania, visit Flinders Islands. The unlucky people need to wither in the Queensland summer's heat. Anyway, so we are here today. I'm taking over Geshla's Friday morning sessions and also Sunday session. Geshla will still be in Flinders. Flinders is coming back next week on the 24th, 23rd, 24th, just before Christmas. And so what I thought of doing today was to look at the general Lamrim structure that we've been covering in the last year or so, and to think, kind of to speak of how we use it for meditation and the Lamrim. And yeah, and we can have a discussion about it. So before we start, we'll start with correcting a motivation with refuge and bodhicitta. And so correcting our motivation with refuge is turning a whole discussion here to be a Buddhist discussion. And correcting a motivation with bodhicitta, the intention to become Buddha, to be of benefit to others, also makes our encounter today become a Mahayana Dhamma practice. And so let's start with that. Go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Supreme Assembly. But the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, then I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. But the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, then I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. But the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, then I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Wow. The whole of powers, it seems, kind of is making its way. Hello. Hey, Mira. All right, and so I just told for the people that just came in, Mila and Sofo, Geshe is away for a week or so, so I'm stepping in to lead this session instead of him. So what I thought of doing today is we've been covering the presentation of the steps of the path to enlightenment, and we've been doing it for such a long time that it's difficult sometimes to go back to the beginning of the presentation and keep all the limbs of the Lamrim teachings in our mind, and also to use it for practice. And so I thought of having just a brief scanning through the things that we've covered so far and how we go to look at the way to develop a concentration of Kamabhati, concentration that is shamatha, but also to think of how we use it for our daily practice if we want to, use that for a Buddhist practice. And so we have studied the Lamrim teachings before quite a few times with the teachers that have taught here at the center, but also with other teachers as well. first and foremost with his honest the dilemma with the sovereignty and so forth. And when Geshe Sturing, one of the Geshes that was used to live here, he used to speak a lot about doing a glance meditation on the Lamrim. And so often we speak of two types of meditations in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, or in the Buddhist tradition in general. So there is placement meditation, where we develop and hone our ability to remain focused on a particular object with a single point of concentration. So that's done in a placement meditation. Then we have analytical meditation, in which we take a particular topic and we think about it from different perspectives in order to bring forth a positive state of mind, and then to habituate the mind with that positive state of mind. And so they're often explained as those two types of meditations, and I think that not always they're brought together into one meditation session. But I think that when I think about how we use these two, I think that it has to be a combination of these two. And so, for example, we have a lot of meditations on the development of loving kindness and compassion and a sense of care for others, bodhicitta, and so forth. Then the tradition that we follow streamlines those meditations for us in following an analytical process, thinking of, first of all, we think of equanimity, then we recognize all sentient beings as having been our mothers, then we think of the kindness that they've shown to us in myriad rebirths in cyclic existence. So it's very streamlined. We analyze that, but then in between, we can also use placement meditations in which we place a mind single-pointedly upon any of those states in order to familiarize our mind and to try to develop a more deeper feeling, sensation, identification of those points to affect the mind, to affect the heart. And particularly when we get to critical stages, such as developing loving kindness, developing compassion, developing love, we want to, I think, use some placement meditation just to make the mind rest upon that state of mind and to make it linger in the mind as much as we can. So we combine these two, placement meditation and analytical meditation in general. But then we add another one, which is, I guess, a subset of analytical meditation. This is called a glance meditation, or in Tibetan, shadha. Now, the word shadha, interestingly, in Tibetan language, is used in a variety of ways. One of the ways that it is used for is counting sheep, let's say. So you go, if you have sheep or goats or yaks, you send them out to the pasture land in the morning, and in the evening, you have to make sure that all of them came back. And so, yeah, you can also send papa to the grazing ground. And so, when you're counting the sheep or the flock, when you want to make sure that all of them came back, you perform a shad, kind of a counting. So, and glance meditation is similar to that. It's like you want to make sure that all the elements of your Lamrim meditation are present. They are included in the meditation on the Lamrim. And so, Geshe Sturing, that was here for many years, used to speak a lot about doing a glance meditation on the success of the path. So he said, what do you do with the Lamrim? You do a glance meditation. Now, over the years, when I thought of how I use kind of the presentation of the Lamrim as a glance meditation, I started to mix and match to different stages. So rather than following all the stages in the presentation of the Lamrim, just as there was taught in the Lamrim, I thought that when you become more, I guess, experienced in thinking of the Lamrim, you can combine some of the others to make it work better for you. And so I have a general structure of the meditation on the Lamrim, the sets of path enlightenment. Sorry, I'm still recovering from COVID. I had COVID a couple of weeks ago almost, and I'm still choking. And so The tradition of the Lamrim begins with Lamrim Kappa-sticks relying upon the spiritual teacher, the root of the path. So this presentation is very much a presentation that is speaking to a Buddhist audience. Often, by the way, when we encounter Buddhist teachings as beginners, the first course that we encounter is, or of the first courses that we encounter is a course on the Lamrim, the steps of the path of enlightenment. And the order is set out in, first of all, relying upon a spiritual teacher, and those teachings can be quite full on. So if you're non-Buddhist and you receive teachings on guru devotion or the way to rely upon the spiritual teacher, could be quite heavy duty. That kind of you get instructions such as thinking or seeing your spiritual teacher as a Buddha, offering yourself to the teacher, offering service, offering this, offering that, and it can be a little bit uncomfortable, I think, if you're non-Buddhist and you encounter that at the very beginning of teaching. So the presentation works better for someone that is Buddhist, that accepts that the root of the teachings is relying upon a spiritual teacher. Anyway, if you see yourself as Buddhist and you want to meditate on that at the beginning of your Lamrim meditation, then you can think of the Buddha in front of you, or your teacher in front of you, or both. So you can meditate on the Buddha, but you think that they appear to me as Buddha, but in essence, they're just like my teacher. Or you can think of your teacher and you think that, for me, the Buddha appears to me in the form of my teacher. And this is the way that I'm taught the steps of the path of enlightenment. And so then the presentation of the Lamrim says that when you rely upon the spiritual teacher, you train the mind in, first of all, recognizing that you have a precious human rebirth with freedoms and richnesses. And so in my personal meditation in the morning, this is where I begin. So I begin with recollecting my precious human rebirth. And so we think of our freedoms and richnesses, considering them to be of great advantage, considering how hard it is to find them and how easily they perish. So all those topics are found very extensively in the presentation of the Lamrim. But in short, in order to become inspired to make the most out of our life, we think that I have everything that I need externally. I mean, not only, I think that in general, we can say that Buddhism, particularly this culture, this place, is a very middle class up kind of tradition. Of course, you don't have to be middle class to be Buddhist, but it's mostly, I guess, a middle class thing. And so we think that I have externally enough. I have enough to get by. I have everything that I need in order to at least try to make something out of my life, or to kind of to train my mind, so I can do that. But also I have spiritual teachers that support my practice. Not only I have spiritual teachers that support my practice, also the Dhamma is available to me. I can still, I have now many resources, not only books, but also teachings that are given online. We have Buddhist centers, we have other things that other aids that we can use for spiritual progress. So have everything externally that is supported, but also internally as human beings. We have intellect. We don't have any debilitating condition that makes it difficult for us to practice the Dhamma. We also have interests. We are not blocked by certain views, wrong views, or other strong views that make it impossible for us to turn a mind towards any type of spiritual development. So we think that we have all those characteristics, and also the teachings are still available to us. But also we think that it is very rare to encounter this opportunity. And particularly when we think of, I guess, the people living around here, the people that live in Australia, the people that live around us, not many people have a genuine interest in mental development or spiritual development. Particularly at this point in time where it seems that it is becoming more and more difficult to really remain focused on mental development. And there's so much competition with the internet and social media and live streaming, and our life is becoming really busy. So many things fighting for attention, and you really need to be strict to a certain degree with yourself and with your time that you have at hand to make sure that there's also something that you can do in order to develop your mind. And so I think that it's actually quite difficult to find those opportunities where you can set the time, you want to set the time, and also there are things to support that for mental development. And that was also then connected with the reflection on death and impermanence. So before that, we come to the conclusion in our Lamrim meditation that I can practice Dhamma, that I need to do it, that I need to do it in this life, that I need to start right from now. So we don't want to procrastinate. We want to make sure that we do something today, next week, next month, and so forth. And so then the presentation of the Lamrim gives us an exhortation to make the most out of our life with freedoms and richnesses. And so to do so, to make the most out of it, we train our mind along three different lines of thinking. So we generate an initial motivation, and then we take that motivation and make it deeper and stronger, more effective, more meaningful. And so first of all, we train our motivation in terms of the steps of the path of those of the small scope, then the steps of the path of those of the medium scope, and then the steps of the path of those of the great scope. And so to begin with, we think of death and impermanence. And so we recognize that, first of all, definitely, hands down, we're going to die one day. I mean, just today, I got a message that one of my classmates that I haven't seen for 30 years, basically, one of my classmates just passed away. So, it's also a point of reflection for myself, passing away all of a sudden. I still consider myself to be moderately young, although I'm already kind of a middle-aged monk. It can happen to us because death is certain. The time of death is uncertain. And then when we start to think of what will occur to us at the time of death, what are the things that we have worked hard on in our life? What are the things that we're going to leave behind? What are the things that are going to continue with us to the future? At least the presentation of the Lamrim says that the only thing that will go with us from this lifetime to the next is our mind. And also with our mind, there's a sense of I, me. So I will also go with my mind to my next lifetime. But also there is a whole baggage of karma, whole baggage of state of mind that I've developed in this life and previous lifetime. And so if in this life I was quite an irritated, angry person, easy to get angry, very jealous, very proud, and so forth, those habits will continue with me from this lifetime to the next. If I make efforts to develop my mind in terms of love and care and compassion and patience and ethics and generosity, those habits would also continue with me from this lifetime to the next. They will continue with my mind. And so my mind is a mixed bag of both negative and positive states. They will continue with me and with my mind to the future. But apart from that, when I think of all the other things that I've accumulated in this life, well, first of all, of course, it's easy to speak about money and possessions. Obviously, they will be left behind. Also, all the people that are dear to our heart, unfortunately, will be left behind. But also the body that we care so much for, that will also be left behind. And so all the things that we identify in this life, all of them will be made irrelevant at some point. I mean, particularly when I think about it sometimes in relation to my ancestors. Obviously I remember my parents. I think that I remember only one grandma. All the other grandpas and grandmas had either passed away before I was born or when I was 1, 2, 3 years old. So not only I have no recollection of them, they are not really, to a certain degree, important in my life. It's not that I have any longing or think that they're really important, or I should kind of think about them, think about a sense of gratitude towards them. They kind of fade out in time to history. And what about the people that came before them? I mean, obviously, from Buddhist perspective, now they have different rebirths, different life, and so forth. But at some point, I will become just as irrelevant as people that lived 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, and so forth, I would be completely irrelevant, just a dust speck on the axis of time, not even that. And so everything, all of the things that I've accumulated in this life that now for me seem to be so important and significant and meaningful, all of the things will be left behind. And the only thing that will continue is my mind and me, a sense of self. Of course, not me as a monk, or not me as Kartson, not me as a, as a man and so forth, but there will be a sense of I for me, with also certain baggage of emotions that will continue to manifest in different ways in future lifetimes. And so we think of death and impermanence as a way of totally reorganizing our priorities. It's a definitely great way of reorganizing our priorities, focusing on what matters and trying to put aside things that don't have a lot of significance. And so, at least from a Buddhist perspective, what does matter is making, to begin with, preparation for a good state of rebirth in the next lifetime. This is definitely what I wanted to do. And so when I think of the opportunities that I've encountered in this life, I was born in Israel. I grew up in Israel. I definitely had no contact with Buddhism until my mid-20s, when I went to India for the first time and then encountered Buddhism. And so not only have I encountered Buddhism, but also I've met one of my closest teachers that now lives in Taiwan. So sometimes when I think about it, it's pretty romantic. He was born as a nomad into a family of nomads in Eastern Tibet, roughly the same year as I was born in. And we were growing in parallel universes. Now, I was born into a middle-class family in Israel. So, I went to school, high school, I got a university degree. In Israel, everyone has to do compulsory military service. So I did that as well. Now, I was living in my 20s in the middle of Tel Aviv. So it was Sin City, a lot of clubbing and beach and parties and rock shows. And it was great. And all along, my teacher that was born into a family of nomads was growing up as a young Turku, as a young Lama. And then when he was in his late teens or early 20s, he went into a 3 year retreat in the mountains in Tibet while I was partying at Tel Aviv. And so when I was in my early 30s, I met him in India. He came out of Tibet 6 weeks before I met him. And I ran into him in a place called Sopem, and we hooked up. And now it's very important to me in my life that I kind of became ordained with someone else called Sita Rinpoche. I got teachings from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, from the Geshes here in the center. I want to do it again in the future. If I could choose what I want to do in my future lifetime, I don't want to live an ordinary life. I want to do something like that again. If I want to do something like that again, if I want to encounter my teachers, if I want to encounter the Dharma, I want to continue to develop my mind, I need to make sure that in this life, I create the cause and conditions for that. Otherwise, if I don't create the cause and conditions for that, it is likely to not happen. So hopefully I'm not creating those causes and conditions. But the whole point in thinking of death and impermanence is to think that I need to make sure that at the very least, there is some continuity in my future lifetime. I mean, how dismal it would be if we won't be able to do any of it again in the future. I mean, it'd be terrible. And so not only we want to do it again in the future, but also we want to make a way to progress towards liberation and also our own enlightenment. And it is only possible if we have similar circumstances, supportive conditions in the future. So of course, I can be born as a man, I can be born as a woman, I can be born as Australian or as Tibetan or what have you. In whatever situation I'm born in the future, I want to make that situation workable to continue to develop my mind. And so I reorganize my priorities when I think of death and impermanence, that my life is quite short. Definitely I'm going to die, hands down, I'm going to die one day. Every day that passes, I'm getting closer to the moment of death. Death is completely uncertain in the sense that the time of death can come in 20 years from now, 30 years from now, but it can also be next week. I don't know. So when I think of death and impermanence, the conclusions that I get to is that, first of all, I need to practice the Dhamma because death is certain. And since the time of death is uncertain, I need to practice now without procrastinating. I mean, definitely, I'm very good at procrastinating. This is probably one of my forte. Now, if I can do something tomorrow, why do it today? So if I can go on retreat next year, why do I need to do it this year? If I can do meditation in the evening, why do I need to do it now? Wouldn't it be just nicer to kick back and relax and have coffee and hang out with friends and so forth? And so, thinking that the time of death is uncertain, we think I need to practice now without procrastinating. And then, since at the time of death, nothing will be of help apart from the Dhamma, in the sense that all the positive and negative imprints that we have developed in this life and previous lifetimes, but also everything that we study that can help us to develop a positive state of mind, being on the verge of death, that would be helpful. And so we think that, therefore, the conclusion that I need to practice pure Dhamma, correct Dhamma. And then the next stage is reflecting on what will occur to us in our future life. And so here the presentation of the Lamrim goes into a great extent of speaking of suffering and miserable sets of existence, the hells and hungry ghosts and animals. When you look at Lama Tsongkhapa's traditional presentation, Lama Tsongkhapa's traditional presentation is, first of all, based on scriptures, but I think that is very much tailored to Tibetan culture. Often they say that, I think it's a Tibetan joke, that one of the roles of a Lama, a spiritual teacher, is scare the laity. So they go around and instill fear in their mind. Speaking about the graphic, how sentient beings are tormented by various types of suffering in the hells and so forth. When you look at Lama Tsongkhapa's explanation in the Lamrim Chemo, it does seem like a horror movie. And so, at least for someone from my background, as I said, I didn't grow up in a Buddhist culture. Sometimes it's quite difficult to take that explanation and to think that definitely it exists like that. But still, as I said, when I think of what is awaiting for me in my next lifetime, I want to avoid states of existence, birth, in which there would be no ability for me to develop my mind. But even more so when we think of animals, for example, in this world, then how I think that we're really more and more in news, in the media, how the ecological system is breaking down, biological system is breaking down. There's a lot of reports about, I think that the world has lost 70% of the insect population in the last 10, 20 years and so forth. And so we think of, when I think of what will occur to me in my next lifetime, first of all, it's going to be pretty difficult to live in an environment that is breaking down, but also thinking of being born as an animal, for example, into the meat industry. It's pretty horrible. I don't want to be born as a pig or as a cow or what have you into the meat industry. Or if you look at clips about safari tours in Africa and so forth, it's also pretty horrible. Animals are preying upon each other while people are kind of looking and enjoying how lions are preying on zebras or gazelles and so forth. I remember that a few years ago, I was watching a boat trip of people that were, I think that they were visiting the Kakadu National Park at the Northern Territory. And they were taken on a crocodile-infested river tour. And as they were sitting on the boat, someone was recording it with, I guess, the phone. There was a group of wild pigs that were just standing and feasting on something at the bank of the river. And they wanted to lure the pigs into the river in order to see crocodiles feasting on wild pigs. Anyway, so they started to throw pieces of bread into the water to lure the pigs into the water. One of them got in, then a croc got it, and the pig started squealing with terror, and all his pig friends also started squealing with terror. And you can see that they're completely agitated and terrified. And the people on the boat were really happy and clappy and kind of thinking of how amazing it is. And I thought to myself, I don't want to be born not only not as a croc, not as a pig, but also not in a situation where everything is horrible, painful and horrible, and also very confusing. And so Lamrim Kappa says we also need to think of what's waiting for us in the future in order to make sure that we do whatever we can in order to avoid a miserable state of rebirth. So there's a lot of fear instilling practices that we employ in order to make sure that we make preparation as much as we can, not only to our own death, but also to future lifetimes. And so we do that in reflecting on what will occur to us in a future lifetime. And then we come to the conclusion that definitely this is not what I want. I don't want to be born in a miserable state of existence. I don't want to be born in a state of existence where there would be a lot of fear for me, pain, but also no capacity whatsoever to develop my mind, to study the Dhamma, to practice the Dhamma, and so forth. And so then Lamrim Kappa in his text, based, of course, on Atisha's text, is speaking of the means for achieving happiness in next life, which begins with training in going for refuge. And so this is what I wanted to focus on for this session, because when Lamrim Kappa speaks of going for refuge, it says, first of all, let's look at the causes for going for refuge. And the causes are fear and faith. And so far, Lamrim Kappa explains the fear of what will occur to us in our next lifetime if we were to be born in a miserable state of existence. So definitely that's going to be horrible. Definitely this is not what we want. And so that's the first cause for going for refuge, fear. And the second cause for going for refuge is faith. And so Lamrim Kappa in his text, I think, speaks about faith in not in a really extensive way, just in general. We have faith that the objects of refuge have the ability to protect us from suffering. And then after he teaches about refuge, kind of he says that once you develop those two causes, you have fear of miserable states of existence, and then you trust that the objects of refuge can afford protection. You go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And you develop certain mental attitudes with respect to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And then once you do that, you then take up the training in going for refuge. So the summation of all those trainings is guarding our karma, behaving in a way that is ethical, doing good stuff, not doing bad stuff. That's basically the gist of it. And so then after that, Lamrim Kappa in his presentation of the Lamrim continues with then speaking of the cess of the path of those of the medium scope, and then the cess of the path of those of the great scope. And so when we think about it in terms of a glance meditation that I've mentioned before, where we go through the different elements of the cess of the path, here in my personal practice, I thought of, well, when I go for refuge, I want to make my refuge deeper. Not just to think of what will occur to me in my next life, but also to add to the causes of going for refuge, fear of samsaric suffering, but also the fear of not being able to do enough for other living beings. To use all of that as a way for going for refuge, not just fear of what will occur to me personally in my future life. And so although Lamrim Kappa speaks of going for refuge as something that belongs to the cess of the path of those of the small scope, or at least he speaks about it in the context of the small scope, I think that we can, once you get more familiar with the cess of the path, you can bring elements from the great scope and elements from the medium scope at this point in time in order to make sure that, in order to enrich the going for refuge. And so at this point, normally in my morning meditation, once I have meditated on the precious human rebirth and also death and impermanence, then I think of, first of all, what will occur to me in my future lifetimes, but also how samsara is dissatisfactory. And Geshe Sultrim, I think, I think it was Geshe Sultrin. He said that there's not a, when you study for your Geshe degree in a monastery and you study with different texts, you get explanations of what samsara is, and you're dealing with hundreds of definitions that you need to memorize, definitions of different topics, different elements. You need to memorize them, you need to debate them, you need to dissect those definitions and divisions and so forth. And you have definitions for things that are pretty obscure. And it's surprising that you don't have a definition for samsara. Now, so we speak a lot about samsara, but there's no dictionary definition of samsara. So Geshe tells a story from one of the debate sessions that he's been to, where a learned Geshe was asked to provide a definition of samsara, and he became silent for a while. He had to think about it. And then he came up with this answer that samsara is a state in which nothing really works perfectly for you. There's always something that spoils the plot. So, of course, it's not a very precise or technical definition, but I think that in terms of our day-to-day experience, when we think of how we always seek a stable situation, a happy situation, comfortable situation, and so forth, in one way or another, things will definitely break down. Either short term, they will break down immediately, or after some time, they will start to either fade away, fade out, not being satisfactory again. Other things will come into play and disrupt our mental peace or quiescence and so forth. And so, in general, samsara is that state where we want things to be perfect. Something bad is bound to happen one way or another. That's kind of in a general sense. But also in a more specific sense, we also say that samsara is being born into a body like that without having any control over that process. And so our mind is governed by afflictive states of mind, by anger, attachment, ignorance. We perform actions, karma, motivated by those afflictive states of mind, and we find ourselves again taking a state of rebirth in which we have no control. And so we are born with a body such as this that ensures that, first of all, we're going to grow old, and that we don't want to, in general, we don't want to grow old. We're going to get sick. We're going to experience a lot of difficulties through our life. So encountering things that we do not wish for, we're going to be separated from things which are dear to our heart, from people that are dear to our heart. We're not going to be able to keep all the things that we have accumulated in our life, even if we want to. And there will always be something that we think that is beyond our reach, that if only we could get it, that would make us happy. When I have lots of things that I want to get, even though, even though I'm a Buddhist practitioner, even though I'm a monk, there's always something in the back of my mind that tells me that if only I get it, that will make me happy. So I think that in general, there is a suffering that is called looking for something and not finding it. But I think that when I think about it in general, the looking for something and never finding it is long-term happiness. This is what I always look for, long-term happiness. And I never find it within the things that I try to do, not in movies, not in food, not in music, not in swimming, not in hanging out with friends. No, of course, it makes me happy. Of course, it gives me a lot of happiness and comfort. But in terms of thinking that if only I could do that for the rest of my life, that will really make me happy, I will always look for that and not find that happiness, long-term happiness. And so I think about that, but also there are so many different situations that we can see around us in which we think that there's a lot of suffering in this world amongst humans, but also amongst animals. I don't want to be born in any of those states of existence because it will still be a lot of suffering. So not only I think of being born as an animal in a miserable state of existence, but also as human beings, particularly living here in Australia, we see suffering around us, but it's still relatively quite comfortable comparing to other places around this world. And so even if we are born with imperfect situations, things are going to break down for us, but it is also not unlikely that we will run into difficult situations, horrible situations, disappointing situations, and so forth. So any situation in which I'll have to do it again and again and again, right? So death and death and death and death repeatedly, and then having to go again and again through growing up and aging and becoming sick and working hard, to find short-term happiness. So try to at least find something that will be more long-term. I have to do it again and again and again and again. It's exhausting. I mean, now when I said that it's exhausting, often I don't think about it like that. But when I sometimes try to think of samsara, is this endless process in which I just have to do it again and again and again. Again, struggle as a young adolescent, teenager, grown-up person, forming relationship, going to work, getting what I need to get by in this life. It's just exhausting to do it again and again and again, to go through those struggles. So I think about it in terms of another cause for going for refuge. But then also, when we think of the people that are close to us in this life, we have friends and family members to begin with. And our ability to be of benefit to them could be quite good, but it's still very limited. Well, we're not going to be able to prevent them from dying, from getting sick, from becoming facing disappointment, big or small in this life, having heartache. Where our capacity to be of benefit to those who are close to our heart is limited. But also when we think of the relationships that we have had with other people in this life and in previous life, we are always limited in our ability to not only protect ourselves, but also to protect others. And so I add that as another cause for going for refuge is a fear of continuing endlessly with always not being good enough, not having enough power, not having enough ability to be of benefit to others. Particularly when you think of the people that are close to your heart, and I think that if maybe it's coming even closer to a heart when you become a parent. So when you think of your kids, you definitely want to protect your kids long-term in whatever way you can, but it's impossible to do everything for them. At some point, they will experience pain and problems, becoming sick, growing old, having relationships issues or whatever. It's impossible for us to protect other people perfectly from suffering. And so, although Lamrim Kappa in the context of going for refuge spoke of the cause for going for refuge is fear of miserable states of privilege, if we are going to use this Lamrim structure, I think that at this point it's good to bring in all the different ways in which we're limited, we suffer, or things are not really satisfactory enough for us into going for refuge. That's the first cause for going for refuge. And then Lamrim Kappa also mentions the second cause for going for refuge, which is having faith that the three objects of refuge can afford protection. And so here it gives an abridged presentation of the objects of refuge. So it said that we go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And then it says, we can think of what makes the Buddha be an object of refuge that is suitable to protect us. And so the Buddha is free from all fears. The Buddha is skilled in freeing all others from fears. The Buddha has unbiased compassion and love for others. The Buddha helps others, regardless if they have helped the Buddha before. And therefore, Lamrim Kappa says, it is possible, it is suitable to trust the Buddha. And since it's suitable to trust the Buddha, it is also possible to trust the Dhamma that the Buddha taught and also the Sangha. So it's a very, I think, very abridged presentation of how to have faith in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Again, I think that for people like me who haven't grown up as Buddhists, it doesn't provide a lot to work in terms of having a deep sense of faith in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So to have a deeper sense of faith, it requires, I think, obviously people approach it differently, but for me, for my disposition, it works better to think of increasing my knowledge, to study what the Buddha is, what the Dhamma is, what the Sangha is, but to study that over a long time. And so, luckily here at the center, we, for quite a few decades, we have a good study program that provides education, Dhamma education on various topics. And over the years, I can see that I've built a better understanding, a more deeper understanding of what the Buddha is, but also what the Dhamma is, what the Sangha is, but also my own ability to become a Buddha myself, my own ability to become someone that is free from ignorance, from anger, from attachment, and so forth. And so to have faith as the second cause for going for refuge, here I think that we need to slow down and develop a long-term approach by which we continue to study about the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, so that we'll develop the faith that there is something in there that can protect us from suffering, but not just to expect that the protection will come from their side. It comes with the knowledge that also we need to do enough from our side in order to get that protection. And so it's like, you could say, a 50-50% deal. Rather than thinking that the Buddha will do all the work for us, we think, I trust what the Buddha taught, because the Buddha, first of all, attained an unlimited consciousness. So it is possible for us, for our mind, to become unlimited. Currently, my mind is limited. My knowledge is limited, but also my own disturbing emotions limit my mind. It is possible, when I look at my mind, it is possible to, first of all, reduce the power of my disturbing emotions, to have less anger, less agitation, less jealousy, less pride, to have a lesser sense of ignorance, to develop a better understanding of reality, to develop love and compassion and generosity and so forth. All of this is possible. And so it is possible for me, for my mind to become unlimited. And therefore, I think that someone that has become a Buddha has attained a state in which the mind is unlimited. And if the mind is unlimited in its knowledge of reality, but also with positive states of mind, with love and compassion and so forth, then the teaching that that person left for me are also unlimited teachings. And so when we look at the different sets of teachings that the Buddha gave, which are supported by the teachings that came from the Nalanda master, who give commentaries to the teachings of the Buddha, then we can get a sense that that the Dhamma can protect us from suffering. Not only the Dhamma, the teachings that the Buddha gave, but the development of those teachings in our own mind. And then we have also trust in Sangha. So we think about it in terms of, for example, the community of teachers that we rely on, either in this organization or in other organizations. And so when I think of people that for me represent the Sangha, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I have full, or Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Siddha Rinpoche, and so forth, I have full confidence that they can communicate to me the teachings of the Buddha and to teach it in a way that is really suited for me. Not only that, with some of the teachers are more closer to me in the sense that, still I can hang up with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and ask him daily questions and also pointers for how to fix my disturbing emotions. And of course, I can ask for a general advice if I do get the opportunity to see him, which is very rare. It is more likely that I will get it from teachers that are more available to me. And so for me, they represent the Sangha. But also, it's important to study and recognize our own Buddha nature. To recognize that while the Buddha has the ability to give teachings, we say that the Buddha's mind is always engaging our own mind. The Buddha's mind is present everywhere, in a sense that the Buddha's mind is unlimited in its knowledge. And so, although I don't see the Buddha mind, not only I don't see the Buddha's mind, I don't see your mind. I mean, your mind is completely hidden to me. I see you as persons, and there are sometimes certain physical expressions, special expressions, the way that you communicate with me that can infer your emotional state, but still, by and large, your mind is completely hidden to me. And so I don't see your mind, I don't see a Buddha's mind, but the Buddha's mind is unlimited. It knows all phenomena. And also, when you look at more, I think, in-depth philosophy, it said that wherever a Buddha is a tender union of body and mind. So a Buddha knows phenomena, where a Buddha's mind is, also you'll find a Buddha's body then. Whatever it means, I guess it's very subtle, but the point is that we don't see Buddhas in front of us, but we can think about them as still present, and their enlightened activities can work on our mind. They can teach us, but we can also engage with those teachings. And also the nature of our own mind, the nature of my mind, is not different to the nature of a Buddha's mind. So when we think of, let alone a Buddha, when I think of, again, if I think of our teachers, His Holiness Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche and so forth, their minds seem to be pretty awesome. I mean, I wish I had a mind like His Holiness Dalai Lama or Lama Zopa Rinpoche and so forth, or Geshe Sharing. I want to have a mind like that. So it seems that it's quite a great distance, a great gap from where I am here and the mind of His Holiness Dalai Lama. But still, the nature of my mind is exactly the same as the nature of the mind of His Holiness Dalai Lama. To begin with, the most subtle nature is emptiness of true existence. The emptiness of true existence of my mind is exactly the same nature as the mind of His Holiness, or the mind of the Buddha, or the mind of all the other spiritual teachers that we rely on. But also, the mind is being just an entity of knowledge and clarity and cognition. That is also the same for me and the same for all my teachers. And so there is an ability for me to develop my mind in the same way that they've developed their mind in the past. And not only that, also, I have what we call a lineage, in that it is possible for me to develop positive states of mind. It is not impossible for anyone. It's not impossible to develop love, compassion, generosity, patience, and so forth. These are states of mind that are completely within our reach. If we use the Buddhist technology, techniques, practices, and so forth, which are streamlining all those different practices, it's completely possible for us to develop all those positive qualities. And so that lineage that can be developed is present in us. And it is based on the recognition that a mind does not exist inherently. In that, if a mind exists inherently, which means independently, without depending upon cause and conditions, without depending upon certain factors, the processes that go through the mind. If the mind would have existed in and of itself independently, it would have been impossible for us to do anything about the mind. If, for example, anger would be inherent within our mind, it would be impossible for us to get rid of anger. Not only that, every moment we should either be angry, or there would be no way whatsoever that we would become angry, because anger would be something that is independent. And so we recognize that our mind does not inherently exist. It is not independent. It is subject to influence by cause and conditions. And also, it depends upon the different processes that go through it. We call them mental factors, or the different parts of the mind that can be changed, can be controlled, that can be either habituated using certain mechanism, or can be completely eliminated during using other mechanisms. It's possible to do it. And so not only I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and recognizing that the Buddha is someone that has an unlimited mind, that the Dharma that the Buddha taught is based on having an insight into reality and having it put complete stop to all afflictive emotions. and also that there are spiritual teachers around me that can communicate the teachings of the Buddha to me. I also recognize that I have faith in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, because I recognize that my mind can engage with us. My mind can engage the teachings of the Buddha. The nature of my mind is not different to the nature of the mind of Buddha. And also, it is possible for me to develop faith, to develop knowledge, to develop wisdom, to develop love, to develop compassion, to develop generosity, and so forth. It is possible. And therefore, when I think of going for refuge in terms of fear and faith that are taught in the steps of the path of those of the small scope, I think that we can at this point add more points into going for refuge that belong to more advanced stages of the path. And so then if we think that we're also adding into the causes for going for refuge, when we speak about fear, for example, fear of not being able to do enough for others, always being limited in our capacity to be of benefit to others, not having the knowledge that is full knowledge of being able to be of benefit to others, we're also bringing in part of, you can say, part of the practice of bodhicitta into a way of going for refuge. And so we think, the way that I think about it, when we study about bodhicitta, we study in the section that pertains to the steps of the path of those of the great scope. So bodhicitta, the wish to attain the state of Buddha for the sake of all other living beings. So we recognize that all sentient beings have been our mothers before, that they've been kind to us. We develop the wish to repay the kindness. We develop love and compassion and the wholehearted resolve. And thinking that I definitely need to do something for the sake of others to free them from suffering. And for that end, I need to become Buddha. This is bodhicitta, the wish to become Buddha for the sake of others. And so we think about it also, I think we can think about it in relation to going for refuge. Why am I going for refuge? I'm going for refuge because I myself want to become Buddha. So if I want to become Buddha, first of all, I need to start with going for refuge and develop the cause of not being able to have full knowledge of everything that I need to do in order to be of benefit to others. And so if I want to be of perfect benefit to others, I need to become Buddha. My fear is not being able to be Buddha, you can say, fast enough, so that I'll be able to be of benefit to others. And so in that sense, when I think of at least my morning meditation, often it's pretty hard to completely separate refuge and bodhicitta, because they're very connected with each other when you think about it in terms of causes for going for refuge. Unless I myself become Buddha, I'm not going to be of benefit. I'm not going to be able to be of perfect benefit to others. Unless I'm going to develop the Dhamma in my mind, I'm not going to be of perfect benefit to others. Unless I myself become an Arya Sangha, I'm not going to be able to be of perfect benefit to others. Unless I'm going to rely upon the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, I'm not going to be able to be of perfect benefit to others. So they're very much connected in this way. And so when I go back to the meditation outline for the Lamrim, in the sense of the path of those of the small scope, we find the meditation on mindfulness of death, or death and impermanence, then a meditation on what will occur to us in a future life, then going for refuge. And after that, after we've gone for refuge, we then think of the presentation of karma and having to become an ethical person in abstaining from the 10 non-virtues. And only after that, then we train our mind in the steps of the path shared with those of medium capacity. When we think of the Four Truths, meditating on samsaric suffering, the origins of suffering, meditating on the way that we end up again and again in cyclic existence through the 12 links of the planet arising. And then after that, we meditate on the steps of the path of those of the great scope in meditating on bodhicitta and so forth. So although the presentation works like that, and glance meditation is Geshe used to speak of, should be in general going over those stages one after the next. I think that when you become more familiar with the steps of the path, you can bring those elements of the steps of the path of the great scope, meditating on bodhicitta, already to things that you need to do before, which is, for example, meditating on refuge. And since I said quite a few things so far, used a lot of words, I'm wondering if you have any questions, doubts, comments, objections. Mr. Gary?
I'm a little bit curious on following up on the taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. I agree with that.
Could you put the mic close to your mouth, please?
In the last 50 years or so,
Yeah.
since I've been involved with studying the Dharma, both in the West and the East, it seems like the only avenue through to having full belief in the credibility of the Buddha and the Dharma is totally reliant on information and education that we get from the Sangha. But in that period of time, I think this is probably new thing with the Dharma coming to the West and the age of regeneration, all those sorts of things. But there seems to be a reasonable amount of Sangha members who've done very severe university, very intense university studies in India, and maybe they've been going for 3 weeks in the West. But people tend to rely on and see those people as being objects of refuge, and then before very long, that can quite often be the case that they crash and burn, and they don't turn out to be very the source of the refuge before. One of the early things that Lamrim said to myself and a number of other students at Tokyo is, don't believe anything I say here. You check out tomorrow with the debate. And that seems to me a little bit less common these days. Do you have anything to sort of comment about that?
I think that in general, I like this attitude of not trusting anything that the Buddha said or the teacher said without checking it out. And we do it as much as we can, I think, over the years when we study. But I always think, there are things that we can check and things that we cannot check. I think that although the general attitude is telling us not to accept anything without having checked it before, there are things that even if you check, you're not going to find out. It's like, for example, how do I check that karma works? We get teachings on karma, but there's I think, requirement of having some blind faith in karma for it to work, because we don't see the working of karma very directly. How would I know, for example, that when I experience pain in this life, that's a result of harming someone in my previous life? This is something that I need to have a degree of faith to trust in. But before I get to these levels, there are certainly things that I can check. Like, for example, we get a lot of teachings on our mental states. For example, how painful anger is, or attachment is, pride, jealousy, and so forth, and how local remedies work. And so I know from personal experience, when I tried it over the years, that meditating on love and compassion does help in situations where my mind is agitated, hostile, angry. And so I know that meditating on death and impermanence, the precious human rebirth, really helps me out in sorting out my priorities in this life and hopefully living a life that is more meaningful. So I can verify that. And also, I guess that over the years, Gary, you probably had ample opportunities to receive teachings on the philosophical view and emptiness and so forth. So all those things, all those teachings also make sense over time. So if those teachings make sense, then also things that I cannot really check, they also make sense. But it is true now that in some sense, we're becoming, in general, in the world, more lazy in terms of checking things out. We're expecting other people to tell us what's true or what's not true, what's correct or incorrect, without spending a lot of time in kind of making the legwork, the work itself. I think that, all the years here, when we had teachings with the geshes, I came across quite a few situations where, and a question was asked to the geshe, to the teacher, and there was a sense of disappointment that there wasn't a very definite answer that was given. There was given that at the end we need to do the checking up and come to our own conclusion. I think that probably, I don't know, I get the sense that people now want other people to make the decision for them, to make, to give them solutions, to give them answers to questions without finding those answers for themselves. And it's part of, I think, what I said earlier on, that there are so many things that now try to get our attention, occupy our time, compete for our time, that we don't have a lot of time to think about it, to come to our own conclusion. Also, to come to a certain conclusion, we need to have enough information. To have enough information means that we need to put the time into getting that information. I think that in general, there's less and less ability in our personal life to make the time to find all that information. I mean, it's kind of, I see it in myself that how much time I spend on devices, my phone and internet and computer and so forth. Even though I use it for work, when I think of using my computer for work, my laptop for work, and then having the internet available all the time with YouTube and social media and so forth, honestly, I spend more time in doing shit than doing what I need to be doing. And so, in general, I'll have less time to think of. I think, although I have all that technology around me, it means that I have less time to study and less time to kind of really think in a critical way. I guess that's because my mind is too weak. I cannot. My mind is weak in terms of setting borders and limits. Am I actually making sense, or I'm talking completely off topic?
That's fine. So, I just think it's a very interesting conversation because things change so incredibly quickly in the last 20 years or so in terms of how we approach various things. So, for my generation, doing fairly long retreats and doing very long courses, 1 month courses and things, was very much the introduction to the Dharma, and that's changed greatly. Using it. So yeah, I think it's really interesting and relevant and challenging.
I mean, we can see it in some sense, the transformations and the evolutions of centers, Dharma centers, in a place like this. And so when I came to Australia in 2005, when I came here, the internet was not widely available, definitely not on mobile phones and so forth. When I came here, we had people that used to camp in tents for weeks on end, just attending teachings and doing retreats and so forth. It was actually quite funny because I came from, after I lived in India, having lived in India for 4 years. And so I lived at McLeod-Ganj. I rented a small apartment, 2-bedroom apartment. The kitchen and the bathroom were pretty basic. But then I came here, I thought myself, comparing to here, India was a palace. I was actually quite aghast that people were living in tents for weeks on end just to study the Dharma. It was incredible. So we used to have weekend courses happening almost every weekend, and sometimes multiple courses happening on multiple venues here at the center. And the Gompa was not always full, but sizable amount of people who came here. Also for the Lamrim retreats, Easter retreat, and so forth. But over the years, the numbers started to dwindle. And one thing that I recognize here, but also I think at centers like Lange Tampa Center, we also use the weekend courses at Lange Tampa Center, is over time, it became more and more difficult to ask people to commit to doing a full weekend. And so we came up with that idea that if you do a weekend course, but you market it as 2 separate days, people will come. If you market it as 2 full days, it's too difficult. Now, if you arrange for a 1-day course, if you can market it as like you can come either to the morning or evening, you have a chance of getting more people. So I think that it's just a sign of time where it is more difficult for people to commit to do something more in-depth because there's a lot of competition. When there's a lot of competition in our life, everything is fighting for attention through our devices, through the billboards that we're seeing on the way to the shopping malls or whatever. It's way harder to put a stop to it. I mean, it's harder for me to set borders and limits. And so in general, I think that when I think of your generation of many others, I'm slightly younger, but still I think that we grew up in a world that was not controlled by the internet. I think that now it's becoming just harder and harder. And when it's everything is competing, it is making it difficult to really find the answers for yourself. You want other people to give you the answer, but not only to give you the answer, people in general want answers that will be wrapped in a feel-good package. That's the way that it works now with things. So just a second, we'll pass on the mic. We have a couple of people at home.
Curious your thoughts where about literally at the end of the retreat, the offer was made to those attending that retreat in a refuge ceremony. And it's interesting to know, is there a particular or appropriate time in revolution as a student that it would be wise to do that, or can it be done at any point in time for evolution? And what is considered to be the benefits of that, as opposed to just individually seeking refuge through meditation, etc.
All right. And so indeed, here at the center, we have a refuge ceremony that is done 2 or 3 times a year. So we do it always at the end of the annual Lamrim retreat, but also it happens, I think, in other situations as well. In general, my approach to that is when you go for refuge in a refuge ceremony together with a geshe, the refuge vow is given. So the nature of the vow is a commitment. We make a commitment to go for refuge for the rest of our life. This is the meaning of going for refuge in a refuge ceremony. And so, in general, I think that when we grow up in a society such as this, mostly Christian society, we are familiar with conversion ceremonies or a certain ceremony that will certify us to be either Christian or Jewish or Muslim, and also likewise Buddhist. So in general, in the Buddhist tradition, there is no official conversion ceremony. So when you study the topic of going for refuge, it is said that once in your heart, you have that sense of trust in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and you think that for me, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha are my objects of refuge, and there are no other objects of refuge for me, you're Buddhist. Now, of course, when you think that the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha are my objects of refuge, it depends on thinking of refuge as being a protection, and you need to think of what are they protecting me from. So they're protecting me from miserable states of rebirth in the next lifetime. They're protecting me from samsaric suffering, and they're also protecting me from not having full ability to be of benefit to others. But also, within that, we also need to have the thought if you wanted our refuge to be more meaningful, we need to have the thought that going for refuge is not surrendering myself to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha and expecting them to do the work for me. But the thing that if I trust the Buddha as the teacher, and the teachings that the Buddha gave based on the realizations of the Buddha and the cessations that the Buddha developed, and also I trust the Sangha as those that mediate those teachings to me, and I follow those teachings and put them into practice, then true protection will come. So if we have that in our heart, we're Buddhists. But then if we do it as a refuge ceremony, in which the refuge vow is given, where we are making the commitment from this time on and for the rest of my life, I'm going to go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. First of all, it makes refuge become more solid. Makes it, I think, particularly when I think of commitments that are made in front of teachers that I appreciate, that I like, that I respect. If I made when I took ordination from Siddha Rinpoche, I made a commitment in front of Siddha Rinpoche. And so because I really like him, I'm just more careful about my attitude with respect to my ordination vow. Or it's not something I take lightly, it's not that I'm gonna wake up in the morning tomorrow and with a light-hearted thing that today I don't want to be a monk, so I'm going to stop being a monk today. When I make that commitment to Siddha Rinpoche, I really like him. I don't want to disappoint him. I don't want to create in his heart this, and any aching sensation. And so when you make such a commitment in the presence of someone that you like, it's helpful. Now, it is said that then, you can take the refuge vow, and while the commitment is to continue to go for refuge for the rest of your life, you can also then commit to give up the 5 things which we give up when we take the vow. So killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and intoxicants. So those commitments are very, very specific to the refuge vow. And so while any killing is negative, is a negative action, the type of killing that makes you break the refuge vow is homicide or murder, killing another person intentionally. So of course, killing insects, giraffes and so forth is a negative thing. Still, if we kill animals, for example, of course, definitely it's a negative action. We will experience suffering in the future in defensive conduct, but it's not an action that causes you to lose the vow. To lose the refuge vow, you need to murder another person intentionally. So in that sense, it's easy. Hopefully we're not homicidal people. We do not go around and kill others intentionally. And so that's fairly easy to abstain from killing in relation to the refuge vow. Then lying, it's also easy to abstain from lying in relation to the refuge vow, because while any lying is a negative action, the specific lying that causes you to break the vow is telling a lie about attaining superhuman abilities or capacities using your practice. And so, if I claim, for example, to have realized emptiness, to have clairvoyance, if I claim that I've attained karma abiding, shamatha, and so forth, knowing that I haven't attained it, that is going to be a lie. This is a lie that will cause me to break the vow. Then, sexual misconduct, mainly it's interpreted as being loyal, having loyal and trust in your relationship, or at least not having relationship with someone else that there is another recognized relationship. And so I think that, I don't know if it's that easy, but at least the intention can be brought into the relationship that we have with others, and to abstain from sexual misconduct. Then another one is stealing. Stealing is taking something that was not given to us, that also will cause us to be subsequently branded as a thief. And so I think that I've said it before that, having grown up in Israel, when you go to the supermarket, there's always that part of the supermarket where you have nuts and things that are sold in bulk packets. And, it's not uncommon for someone just to pass by and take an almond and eat it, So if you take one almond or one nut and eat it, it is likely that they're not going to call security person and they're not going to call the police on you. It's not probably sizable enough to be branded as a thief, but still it's a little bit awkward, isn't it? It's a little bit dirty. So to be branded as a thief, it needs to be of a certain value. It doesn't have to be a massive value. I think that probably if you take $5 or $1 or $2, probably you'll be branded as a thief. Anyway, abstaining from stealing, but also I think that with that, particularly at this modern time, I think that at least this is something that I think about it personally. You then start to think of how do I, for example, report my taxes in a way that is honest? If I know that I need to pay tax and I avoid paying taxes, does it fall under the category? Does it come under the category of stealing? If I get away with not paying for something and I should pay for that, is that stealing? I mean, it's not kind of a thing that is, for example, watching pirated TV series, movies and stuff. Is that stealing or is that not stealing? I think that can be debated. For me, kind of the way that I think about it is, I want to protect the values that I have. And if it's if there is a gray area here, and I think that there's actually no gray area, parity is stealing. But if I feel a little bit uncomfortable about it, I think I can avoid it. I'd rather pay money for something rather than losing my vow. And so with making those commitments, you can think, as a Buddhist practitioner, I don't want to take the vow because the vow seems to be pretty advanced. I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready to make that commitment, but I'm going to abstain from them anyway, because this is what I want to do. So I'm not going to kill, not going to steal, I'm not going to lie. Intoxicants, also, this is something that we give up. Alcohol and other substances. So if it is said that if you have the vow and you abstain from them, you accrue more merit, more virtue than doing it anyway while not having the vow. So if you decide that anyway you're going to abstain from killing, stealing, and so forth, it's better to do it with a vow, just because it makes it so more powerful. Now, when should you take that? I think that only when you feel that you're ready to do it, because it is a commitment. So, when I in my 20s and 30s, I never wanted to get married. Now, there was one situation where one of my girlfriends, we thought that she got pregnant. I felt like I'm going to prison for the rest of my life. And then at some point, when we started speaking about getting married, I felt I just can't do it. I felt that I had to run away. And so when I then became a monk and I took the ordination vow, suddenly it felt like getting married. In fact, I made a commitment for the rest of my life. And so you need to be ready to make that commitment. Not to tell others, not just to rely on others, to tell you that it's good for you to do it, that you should do it, that it's time for you to do it, but do it when you feel ready to do it. At least this is my approach. And I do it because we live, I think, sometimes at a Buddhist, or we have connections with Buddhist communities, and we motivate each other to do things like, it's good for you to take an empowerment. It's good for you to take the Bodhisattva vow. It's good for you to go for refuge. I mean, it's hard to know what's good for others. It's sometimes even hard to know what's good for oneself. So I always think that those decisions should be made privately when you feel ready. And sometimes you don't feel ready at all, but you're willing to kind of take a leap of faith. Now, with the refuge vow, you take it, and you can also continue to take it in the future. And so we take the refuge vow, and obviously at some point in our life we're going to undermine the vow. It's not going to remain pure. There are situations, for example, where you make a commitment to abstain from intoxicants, but you don't. So you can take it again in the future. You can take it again in the future and do better, And I'm not using this argument as an encouragement for taking the vow and then breaking it, but it's a type of vow that you can take again and again and work on it on the basis of the vow as improving your ethical discipline. Does it help? All right. Now, Oli was saying, could we say that initially a teacher is a requirement, but that we must then strike out on our own? Otherwise, there is a danger of experiencing our own Groundhog Day, going over the same old stuff over and over. We have to have personal experiential realization. I think that definitely we rely upon our teachers, but we also want to become self-sufficient in a sense that, particularly when I listen to the way that our Tibetan teachers are talking about relying upon their teachers. Like, for example, all of the geshes that I've worked with here at Chenrezig Institute and otherwise in other places say that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is one of their teachers, but they don't get to hang out with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. It's not that they can pick up the phone and calling and get personal advice about things that sometimes maybe is too personal or maybe even too simple. And so we rely upon the spiritual teachers to study, but then the decisions need to be made by us. I have friends that prefer to ask the spiritual teachers, the lamas, about any decision, critical decision that they make in their life. This is their approach. My approach is that I prefer to make my own decisions. You know, if there's something that I do in my life, I want to own it. I want to make my own decision, make sure that I've chosen right. And if not, then I take full responsibility for a wrong decision that I made. Having said that, I have asked my teachers for advice before about critical decisions that I had to make. And so I think that the approaches here can be mixed, either that you rely wholeheartedly upon a spiritual teacher and ask them to make the decisions for you. I think that some people do it with Lama Zopa Rinpoche, it works well for them. I prefer to make my own decisions. I think that both of those approaches are valid. It basically depends upon what works better for you. All right, I got tired. Shall we leave it here for now? Thank you. And so let's finish off with dedicating the virtue that we've created together. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that is not arisen and rise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of the Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. Now we dedicate also for the long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and for all of these activities. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you're the source of all happiness and good. O powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, this man to samsara ends. Sever of the snowland teachings and transmigrated beings who makes extremely clear the path of this unification of emptiness and compassion. To the lotus holder Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And finally, also for the long life of Kyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche, we can also include all the teachers here at the center, Geshe Zultrim, and all the previous Geshes, and all other teachers that you're relying on. You are policy viewers moral way, the seven abundant vertical, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Majinat's victorious doctrine. Who masterfully accomplished magnificent prayers honoring the creatures. Sever of myself and others, please live long. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.